good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM Today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Tuesday, 8th April 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. President Donald Trump is advancing with global trade plans, implementing tariffs on major trading partners despite concerns about economic damage. He asserts that many countries are seeking deals with the US, and the White House says deal-making is moving at Trump's speed. However, dozens of foreign governments were attempting to persuade President Donald Trump to roll back steep tariffs, but the president and his advisors suggested negotiations could be difficult. The Treasury Secretary expressed optimism, initially rallying Wall Street, but the Dow and S&P 500 later ended lower as Trump stood firm on tariffs. The S&P 500 tumbled 3.5%, and the Nasdaq Composite Index shed 3.7%. Trump has specifically threatened additional tariffs on China, including a potential 50% increase if China doesn't rescind its retaliatory tariffs, escalating trade tensions and potentially doubling the cost of U.S. imports for Chinese companies. Economists warn of recession risks from the new U.S. import duties. Economists rip into us tariffs, warning of more inflation. Nobel laureate Paul Krugman said Trump's decision should be seen as a dominance display intended to shock and awe people and make them grovel. The U.S. president's unclear requirements leave nations in the dark about what specifically they can do to avoid getting hammered by tariffs. Kimball Musk said President Donald Trump's policy could lead to a cycle of less consumption and less jobs when referring to the tariffs. Trump administration's introduction of new tariffs will impact American families and parents as prices rise. Republicans Ted Cruz and Rand Paul spoke out on the risks of President Donald Trump's tariff policy for American families. U.S. consumers are preparing for pain as tariffs reaffirm China's manufacturing dominance, as they will have a hard time finding replacements for many staple goods still produced in China. The U.S. was set to implement a 104% tariff on China after Trump's deadline passed. President Donald Trump claimed high tariffs may have prevented the Great Depression, despite historical evidence showing the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 worsened. He also praised Shohei Ohtani in celebrating the Los Angeles Dodgers World Series championship. He also extended by 75 days a deadline for ByteDance to sell us assets of TikTok to a non-Chinese buyer, or face a ban. Senator Mark Warner says the new Donald Trump TikTok extension may violate the law, and that the reported deal doesn't meet legal requirements for eliminating ByteDance's influence over TikTok's U.S. operations. The Trump administration is also pulling back its enforcement of cryptocurrency regulations, disbanding the National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team, NCSA. The Trump administration fired senior Navy Vice ADM Shoshana Chatfield at NATO, reportedly due to comments she made supporting diversity in the force. The Trump administration fired senior Navy Vice AEM Shoshana Chatfield, the only woman on NATO's military committee. The Trump administration's revocation of visas for South Sudanese nationals is adding to the nation's troubles as it faces the threat of renewed war. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced the Trump administration would revoke visas of all South Sudanese passport holders due to the country's refusal to accept repatriated citizens. Aid sources warn that the Trump administration's food aid cuts could put millions at risk, with the UN World Food Program stating the termination of U.S. funding for emergency food assistance could amount to a death sentence. The Trump administration sought to deport Venezuelans using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, leading to a legal challenge. The Supreme Court overturned a block on these deportations, noting the migrants had brought their cases in the wrong court. President Donald Trump announced that the United States would hold talks with Iran to control Tehran's nuclear ambitions and avoid war. Talks would be a late and possibly last opportunity. President Donald Trump announced the U.S. and Iran will hold nuclear talks. He faces the challenge of dismantling the Iranian program. President Donald Trump says the U.S. will hold direct, high-level talks with Iran after more than a decade. Few details were provided. President Donald Trump met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He said some countries like Israel and Japan want to strike deals on tariffs as global concern about Trump's tariffs intensifies. The Supreme Court allowed the Trump administration to terminate 16,000 probationary federal workers across 6 federal agencies and departments. U.S. Supreme Court halted the reinstatement of fired federal employees, stating the nonprofit organizations who were granted an injunction lacked the legal standing to sue. The Supreme Court temporarily blocked an order to return a man wrongly deported to El Salvador. Chief Justice John Roberts issued an administrative stay for the case. The U.S. Supreme Court denied Tawur Rana's application, seeking a stay on his extradition to India. Rana is a Canadian national of Pakistani origin. President Donald Trump planned to sign executive orders to revive coal-fired power plants, aiming to boost power demand for data centers, AI, and EVs. Environmentalists criticized the move as a step backward. President Donald Trump has ordered a fresh review of Nippon Steel's bid for US Steel, with the White House directive sending the share price of US Steel up over 13%. President Donald Trump ordered a second national security review of Nippon Steel's purchase of U.S. Steel after a call with Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba regarding tariffs. President Donald Trump ordered a panel of federal agencies to conduct another review of Nippon Steel Corp's blocked $14.10 billion bid to take over United States Steel. The article discusses how President Trump's demands for loyalty could weaken the U.S. armed forces. Military ties between the Philippines and the United States have deepened since the 2022 election of President Ferdinand Marcos, as the countries launch joint drills aimed at deterrence. The article explores how President Trump's policies could potentially dethrone the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency due to the weaponization of U.S. economic power. NPR examines the Trump administration's ICE campaign against the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, questioning the extent and verifiability of the gang's presence in the U.S. The article questions whether President Trump is having a Liz Truss moment, comparing his policies to Truss's radical policies that caused a market meltdown. But key differences exist. Amidst these global trade tensions, China accused the U.S. of blackmail after President Donald Trump threatened more tariffs, vowing to fight to the end. China vowed to fight to the end if President Donald Trump follows through on a threatened 50% tariff hike, rejecting calls to drop its countermeasures. China is vowing support to help graduates find jobs as the U.S. trade war weighs on the economy, introducing a new system to cover skills training, career guidance, recruitment, and more. China is urging the U.S. to calm. China is embroiled in escalating trade tensions with the U.S., facing accusations of blackmail and vowing to fight to the end against U.S. tariffs. President Trump has threatened additional tariffs in response to China's retaliatory measures, which China views as unilateralism, protectionism, and economic bullying. China maintains it is powerful enough to withstand U.S. pressure and is censoring criticism at home. The People's Daily has assured the country is prepared to counter Trump's tariffs with extraordinary measures. The Ministry of Commerce vows to resolutely strike back against any further U.S. tariffs. Some analysts believe that the swift and forceful response from China to us tariff increases means the time for reconciliation appears to be over. The trade war could significantly damage global supply chains, and no country is fully protected. The potential impact includes Chinese companies seeing the cost of their U.S. imports double. China has been moving forward with cross-border rail projects in Central Asia and Southeast Asia. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has expressed concerns about China's military expansion and investments in its defense industry, describing them as staggering. He urged for a stronger Japan-NATO alliance in response to China's rapid military expansion and global stability threats. Concerns have also been raised about the China-funded expansion of the WHAM naval base, with the U.S. and analysts fearing it will be used as a strategic outpost by China. China has close ties with Moscow, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reported the capture of 2 Chinese nationals fighting for the Russian army in the eastern Donetsk region, prompting Kyiv to demand a response from Beijing and its allies. Zelensky suggested it is evidence that Moscow isn't interested in peace. Economically, China's largest chip-making equipment supplier expects another 50% jump in profits after its third year of growth. A staggering $1.90 trillion in extra industrial lending is fueling a continued flood of exports. Huawei Technologies Company, Intel Limited, has set up a new auto company with Dongfeng Motor Group Company Limited to launch a new electric vehicle, BEV, brand as it accelerates its push into China's car market. Countries reliant on Chinese development support will have less room to diversify their ties given the aid cuts. President Xi Jinping's coming visit to Malaysia, Cambodia, and Vietnam has turned attention to China as a potential economic stabilizer. Advocates for easier trade with Beijing, including Spain, face off against Poland and others backing protections against Chinese imports. Hong Kong can lean into its role as a superconnector and help boost cooperation between European countries and China. China is also a leader in clean energy, and Asia and other regions are expected to boost renewable partnerships with it. The Gulf's growing renewable energy ties with China and Southeast Asia are poised to reshape global power dynamics. Domestically, by 2035, China aims to have basically achieved agricultural modernization, and for rural residents to have basically met modern living conditions according to a new plan. The People's Bank of China has added a column to its website listing entities at high risk for money laundering in advance of an international review. The Chinese Academy of Social Sciences has abolished an entity, warning that any activities carried out in its name would be illegal. Turning to the United States, it is engaged in an escalating trade war with China, with President Trump threatening additional tariffs in response to China's retaliatory measures. China accuses the U.S. of unilateralism, protectionism, and economic bullying. Trump said he would impose the new tariffs on China if Beijing did not retract a 34% retaliatory tariff on U.S. goods that it announced in response to Trump's initial salvo. In Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky reported the capture of 2 Chinese nationals fighting for the Russian army in the eastern Donetsk region. He suggested it is further evidence that Moscow isn't interested in peace, and noted Beijing's close ties with Moscow, despite no publicly known direct aid to Russia's invasion. Zelensky said Kyiv will demand an explanation from Beijing and a reaction from its allies, including the US and Europe. Elsewhere, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has expressed concerns about China's military expansion and investments in its defense industry, describing them as staggering. He urged for a stronger Japan-NATO alliance in response to China's rapid military expansion and global stability threats. Looking to Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu plans to plead with President Trump for a tariff break and seek further backing on Iran and Gaza. Shifting to Chile, mining companies describe a system to comply with international treaties on indigenous rights as unprecedented. Across Europe, the continent experienced its hottest March ever, leading to rainfall extremes. European Union officials will vet and vote on a list of retaliatory tariffs this week while contemplating what comes next. Ursula von der Leyen raised grievances with Li Qiang, and emphasized their shared responsibility in supporting a strong trading system. Advocates for easier trade with Beijing, including Spain, face off against Poland and others, backing protections against Chinese imports. Meanwhile, in the mineral-rich Democratic Republic of Congo, some analysts suggest it is China's pot of gold at the end of the standard gauge railway. Finally, a Canadian couple on Australia's Norfolk Island are likely the only business owners affected by the Trump administration's tariffs. Israel's military actions are under intense scrutiny following autopsies indicating the intentional shooting of 15 Palestinian paramedics and civil defense workers. The Palestine Red Crescent is calling for an international investigation into these actions, which they are terming a war crime. The Israeli military initially gave a different account, but now admits it was mistaken and is investigating. An Israeli airstrike on a tent camp near a hospital in Khan Yunis killed 10, including a journalist, and injured dozens. Palestinian medics report further Israeli strikes on tents outside 2 hospitals, resulting in at least 2 deaths, including a local reporter, and 9 injuries. Israeli soldiers report the army has razed Palestinian homes, farmland, and infrastructure near the Gaza border. The Supreme Court is considering Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's attempt to fire spy chief Ronen Bar. A lawsuit has been filed against Bashar Masri on behalf of over 200 plaintiffs, including a former business partner, whose daughter was killed in the Hamas attack on the Nova Music Festival. Turning to the United States, President Trump announced the U.S. will engage in direct negotiations with Tehran to curb its nuclear program. He warned Tehran of great danger if talks fail during a White House meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. The leaders of Israel, Hungary, and the United States have moved to neutralize the judiciary both at home and abroad. In Hungary, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel met with Prime Minister Viktor Orbán in Budapest. The leaders of Israel, Hungary, and the United States have moved to neutralize the judiciary, both at home and abroad. Finally, in Australia, the Greens Party has criticized a Facebook advertisement in Melbourne linking the party to Hamas as inflammatory and untruthful. The advertisement is endorsed by 2 former Labour MPs. Japan is navigating a complex landscape of economic pressures, demographic shifts, and evolving international relations. Facing an aging population, Japan has eased restrictions on foreign in-home caregivers, highlighting innovative solutions to demographic challenges. A 3D-printed train station was constructed in Arida in just 6 hours to maintain rail services. Economically, Japan is vulnerable to potential U.S. tariffs, requiring careful negotiation strategies. Bankruptcies in fiscal year 2024 have reached an 11-year high, driven by labor shortages and rising prices, particularly affecting small and mid-sized companies. Speculation suggests the Bank of Japan, BOE, might cut rates if tariffs significantly impact the economy. The stock market has, however, shown resilience, rebounding on hopes of a favorable tariff deal with the U.S. and a weaker yen. Japan is extending sanctions against North Korea for 2 years, citing Pyongyang's ongoing nuclear weapons and missile development programs, as well as the unresolved issue of abducted Japanese nationals. A case involving individuals suspected of assisting a North Korean worker to pose as a Japanese citizen underscores potential links to North Korea's foreign currency acquisition efforts. Furthermore, Japan has expressed caution regarding the strengthening military ties between China and Russia. Manufacturers in Japan are diversifying production and suppliers to mitigate the impact of a potential Nankai Trough earthquake, following government urging. The country has also initiated monitoring of acute respiratory infections, publishing data to inform the public. Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako of Japan visited Kyoto, Iwo Jima, to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the end of fighting, honoring former residents and those who died in the Battle of Iwo Jima. In Fukushima, a local student is using art to combat lingering prejudice against the region and its products, 14 years after the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant accident. Kyoto's culinary scene is experiencing a surge in spicy ramen featuring locally grown sancho pepper, while traditional Japanese wheat noodles, somen, are being enjoyed in unconventional ways. Musicians Yano Akiko and Agatsuma Hiromitsu are blending traditional and innovative styles, captivating audiences as Yano and Agatsuma. A bar district in Japan is using bilingual wristbands to gauge the mood of revelers. Kawasaki Heavy Industries in Japan faced a 1 billion tax bill due to a scandal involving entertainment of maritime self-defense force personnel. A Hokkaido group is poised to receive the assets of the Unification Church, a controversial group that decided to donate its residual assets to Tenchi Seikyo in 2009. Turning our attention to Meta, the company is expanding parental controls for teenagers on Instagram and bringing them to Facebook and Messenger, enhancing online safety measures for younger users. South Korea is preparing for a snap presidential election on June 3rd, after President Yoon Yeol was impeached and removed from office for declaring martial law last year. Opposition leader Lee Jae-myung is currently leading in the polls. South Korea's military also fired warning shots after about 10 North Korean soldiers briefly crossed the border. The country is also grappling with a record low birth rate. Investigations continue into the December 29 crash of Jeju Air Flight 2001-2016 at Muan International Airport, which killed 179 people, with pilots reportedly discussing alternative landing plans beforehand. Investigators are also planning to question Kim Kyun-hae regarding stock market manipulation allegations. Meanwhile, K-pop remains a major cultural export, and more South Korean celebrities are disclosing divorces, navigating privacy, public perception, and changing societal views. Turning to Japan, the Nikkei stock index rebounded strongly with a 6% increase, recovering from a year-and-a-half low, supported by gains in technology stocks. In Israel, court proceedings faced disruption due to protests against the dismissal of security chief Ronen Bar, with allegations of political motivations behind the firing. United Kingdom. The UK government is developing a controversial murder prediction tool. This tool uses algorithms to analyze personal data to identify potential killers, raising concerns about privacy and civil liberties. Ministers and over 70 MPs are supporting MPs Yuan Yang and Abchiza Mohammed after Israel barred them from entering the country, a first for British MPs. The NRL's potential Super League takeover hinges on French clubs' involvement in British Rugby League amidst a power struggle. Former Bank of England Deputy Governor Charlie Bean proposes a 0.5% interest rate, cut to 4%, to buffer against us trade tariff fallout. Opposition leader Keir Starmer is addressing the Scunthorpe Steelworks situation, with polls showing public support for retaliatory tariffs against the US. Liz Truss had the shortest term as Prime Minister, ousted by her own party in just over 6 weeks. Dan Norris, a lawmaker who recently won a seat, was quickly suspended from Britain's governing party. Piles of garbage have accumulated in Birmingham due to a month-long sanitation strike, leading the City Council to declare a major incident and deploy extra clean-up resources. Prince Harry is challenging the withdrawal of his UK police protection, claiming it violates policy and constitutes inferior treatment, appealing the decision regarding his taxpayer-funded security. India. India is actively pursuing more trade deals to navigate global economic uncertainty. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman remains optimistic about securing a free trade agreement with the UK. A UK court has denied India's request to appeal the extradition discharge of Sanjay Bhandari. Italy. King Charles III and Queen Camilla met with Italian President Sergio Mattarella during their state visit's second day. King Charles III has arrived in Rome for a state visit to Italy, marking his first overseas trip since his brief hospitalization for cancer treatment side effects. Russia and Ukraine are locked in continued conflict, marked by ongoing military operations and diplomatic engagements. Ukraine has cast doubt on the feasibility of a Black Sea truce with Russia, particularly given Ukraine's recent successes in repelling Russian vessels and restoring commercial shipping. Russia, while signaling openness to a truce, seeks further details on its implementation. President Volodymyr Zelensky acknowledged Ukrainian troop activity in Russia's Belgorod region, attributing it to defensive operations by the 225th Assault Regiment aimed at safeguarding Ukrainian settlements. Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines, however, voiced skepticism about achieving peace despite US-led ceasefire negotiations, especially as Russia continues its advance. A Ukrainian city is in mourning after a Russian missile strike claimed the lives of children playing near apartment buildings, underscoring the devastating human impact of the war. Ukraine is actively pursuing diplomatic avenues to bolster its partnerships and gain further assistance. A Ukrainian delegation is scheduled to visit Washington to revitalize a mineral agreement with the U.S., underscoring Ukraine's geostrategic value in global resource networks. Furthermore, the conflict with Russia has highlighted the pressing need to integrate hundreds of thousands of newly disabled individuals into Ukrainian society, which faces existing challenges in ensuring inclusivity. The conflict's reverberations extend into diverse arenas, exemplified by the controversy surrounding Alex Ovechkin's NHL achievements and his past endorsements of Russia's leadership amidst the war in Ukraine. US President Trump has voiced impatience with the slow progress of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, reflecting broader international unease about the protracted conflict. Dominican Republic is in mourning after a roof collapse at the Jet Set nightclub in Santo Domingo early Tuesday morning, claiming at least 44 lives and leaving over 160 injured. The popular nightclub, hosting a concert frequented by politicians, athletes, and other prominent figures, became a scene of devastation. Search and rescue teams deploying heavy machinery and drones are continuing their efforts to locate any remaining survivors amidst the wreckage. New Zealand now features Westpac ATMs, offering Hindi, Samoan, and Tongan language options nationwide. Cook Islands residents are celebrating a milestone related to New Zealand citizenship. Air Chatham's and Air NZ are exploring an interline agreement to enhance regional air travel. The Gene Technology Bill, designed to modernize regulations for the expanding field of gene technology research, is under consideration. A recent poll indicates most New Zealanders feel more secure with visible police patrols. A revised defense strategy reflects the evolving global environment. Auckland homeowners will experience additional delays in receiving updated property valuations. Health NZ is investigating the death of an Auckland boy after routine tonsil surgery at Southern Cross Hospital. Turning to Pasifika, Tawanu Perenisitagata Tapu, a veteran of the inaugural Polyfest, is now a mentor, sharing his experience with younger generations. Oscar Kitely, from the Pasifika comedy group Naked Samoans, reflects on the group's nearly 3-decade history of provocative humor. In local sports, Napier City Rovers captain Jim Hoyle has played his 200th game as the club continues its winning streak. Wanganui softball player Poppy Priddle has been selected for the White Sox team. Thailand saw the detention of American academic Paul Chambers, an expert on Southeast Asian civil-military relations, on charges of insulting the monarchy. The strict lèse-majesty law could result in a 15-year prison sentence. Chambers was denied bail and imprisoned in Phitsanulok. Thailand's laws against criticizing the monarchy are stringent, but foreigners are rarely targeted. Separately, following an earthquake impacting both Myanmar and Thailand, social media was flooded with false content, including AI-generated videos and misleading images. Concerns are mounting in Bangkok about earthquake resistance, given its location in an active earthquake zone similar to California, Italy, Japan, Mexico, and the Caribbean. Turning to Japan, a 7-Eleven manager's suicide was officially recognized as job-related, highlighting the ongoing issue of death from overwork. The determination underscores the severe pressures faced by workers in Japan's intense work culture. In Myanmar, recent earthquake relief efforts faced significant challenges due to ongoing rain and conflict. Similar to Thailand, the Myanmar earthquake led to a proliferation of false content on social media, including AI-generated videos and misleading images. European Union nations are weighing retaliatory tariffs against the US, especially impacting industries like German auto manufacturers. The EU aims to project strength amid rising trade tensions with the US. Meanwhile, the EU foreign policy chief is encouraging Albania to accelerate reforms to facilitate its EU membership bid. The NBA has been eyeing a European presence for several years. French President Emmanuel Macron is leading France's vision for Europe amidst war and trade disputes. Transatlantic relations face growing challenges, particularly concerning Ukraine and broader European security issues, despite attempts at reconciliation by US Secretary of State Rubio with NATO allies. In Belgium, Prince Laurent is seeking a state pension, arguing he needs financial support for his wife and adult children. The International Criminal Court faces ongoing defiance as leaders from Israel, Hungary, and the United States continue to challenge its authority. The European Union has opted not to proceed with planned tariffs on American bourbon. Ireland, Italy, and France voiced concerns that the tariffs would initiate a wider global trade conflict. These nations feared negative repercussions for their domestic alcohol sectors. King Charles III of the United Kingdom recently made a state visit to Italy, marking his first international travel since his recent health challenges. Separately, in Italy, authorities fined a ticketing firm and 6 tour operators almost €20 million. They illegally stockpiled and resold Colosseum tickets at inflated prices. Italy's location in a seismically active region is a factor tourists should consider. South Korea is facing scrutiny over the K-pop show Under 15. Critics allege it pushes young participants to mimic the suggestive styles of established K-pop artists. This includes their clothing, songs, and dance moves, causing concern among parents and child welfare advocates. Sri Lanka has recorded a population exceeding 2 crore in its 2024 census, marking a significant milestone since the first census in 1871. Meanwhile, operations have begun at the Adani-backed port terminal in Colombo, a project that some have described as a legacy of previous administrations. In related news, India is strengthening its ties with Sri Lanka against a backdrop of increasing strategic competition with China in the region. Turning to Bangladesh, the nation has appointed a new High Commissioner to New Delhi, following a recent meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Mohammad Yunus in Bangkok. This new appointee brings a wealth of diplomatic experience, having previously served as ambassador to both Sri Lanka and the Netherlands. Germany is halting its participation in the UN refugee resettlement program, indicating a potential shift towards stricter migration policies with the new government. Bosnian Serbs have declared German Secretary of State for European Affairs Anna Luhrmann persona non grata in retaliation for German sanctions. Finance Minister Jörg Kukis is worried about the substantial adverse impact of new U.S. tariffs, advocating for partnership-kind negotiations with Washington. Germany is also calling for an investigation into shocking accusations relating to the Israeli army's killing of Gaza aid workers, spurred by new video evidence. Former Germany forward Jürgen Klinsmann has named Bayern Munich striker Harry Kane as one of the top 3 contenders for the Ballon d'Or. Turning to the United States, the potential impact of new tariffs is causing concern, as German Finance Minister Jörg Kukies anticipates a substantial adverse impact on Germany's economy and seeks negotiations with Washington. Simultaneously, Porsche has reported increased deliveries to the U.S. market, even as orders from Europe and China have seen a decline. From the Russia-leased Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, a U.S.-Russian crew of 3 launched to the International Space Station aboard a Soyuz rocket. Turning to Russia, President Vladimir Putin voiced support for a potential truce in Ukraine, while simultaneously questioning its practicality. A network of pro-Russian websites are using AI-generated false reports to mislead chatbots. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has also brought scrutiny to Alex Ovechkin's NHL record, given his past expressions of support for Russia's leadership. Meanwhile, in the United States, President Donald Trump expressed his discontent with the perceived slow pace of negotiations surrounding the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In Ukraine, President Zelensky confirmed that Ukrainian troops, specifically the 225th Assault Regiment, are conducting operations within Russia's Belgorod region. India faces mounting challenges from online betting apps and fantasy gaming, sparking worries about addiction and financial ruin. An American tourist was apprehended for attempting to contact the protected Sentinelese tribe, offering them Diet Coke and violating protective laws. India's relationships in its region are becoming critical, even though it isn't part of the Squad. These relationships help as India and Southeast Asia face similar issues with China's territorial claims. A meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Mohammad Yunus hints at possible improvements in India-Bangladesh relations, although mending the strained ties will take time. Portugal recently honored President Drupadi Murmu with the City Key of Honor in Lisbon. This award acknowledged the Indian diaspora's major contributions to Portugal. Australia is currently witnessing internal friction within the ruling Labour Party, with factions advocating for sanctions against Israel and a withdrawal from the AUKUS Security Pact. Simultaneously, the coalition has presented an energy strategy, projecting significant reductions in household and industrial gas expenses, although skepticism surrounds its practicality. Housing prices in Australia have seen substantial growth, with the median home value rising by $230,000 over the past 5 years, driven by supply and demand dynamics. Adding to the political landscape, the Liberal Party's candidate for Whitlam, Nathaniel Smith, has come under scrutiny for past remarks concerning alleged Marxist indoctrination in schools. Turning to Fiji, the nation celebrated men's rugby. Sevens team is set to compete against formidable opponents, including New Zealand, Australia, and Spain, in the upcoming SEN's World Championship. Pakistan is facing a significant outflow of Afghan refugees as repatriation efforts intensify. The government has set a deadline compelling around 800,000 Afghans holding Afghan citizen cards to return to their home country. Simultaneously, Pakistan is actively seeking foreign investment, hosting a summit focused on attracting billions of dollars into its minerals sector. High-level delegations from the United States, Saudi Arabia, and China are anticipated to be in attendance. Meanwhile, the U.S. Supreme Court has denied Tahawur Rana's request to halt his extradition to India. Rana, a Canadian national of Pakistani descent, remains in custody in Los Angeles and is wanted in India for his alleged involvement in terror-related activities. His extradition case has been closely watched due to its international implications and the complex legal arguments presented. Following the devastating earthquake in Myanmar, which resulted in approximately 3,600 fatalities, rescue operations are winding down. Singapore provided assistance by deploying cyborg cockroaches fitted with infrared cameras and sensors for search and rescue. The military government in Myanmar has faced criticism for allegedly impeding and delaying the distribution of aid following the disaster. Junta leader Min Aung Hlaing visited the earthquake's epicenter 10 days after the event, directing relief efforts toward religious institutions. Across the border in Thailand, the earthquake has prompted residents of Bangkok to reevaluate the safety of high-rise buildings, leading some to consider relocating. Iran has stated that upcoming talks with the U.S. regarding its nuclear program will be indirect, despite President Trump's suggestion that discussions in Oman would be direct. These expected talks, during which Iranian Foreign Minister will engage with U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff in Oman, represent a crucial, albeit late, opportunity to manage Tehran's nuclear ambitions and potentially avert war. Separately, a gas leak at a coal mine in northern Iran resulted in the deaths of 7 workers, including 3 Afghan nationals. The insistence on indirect talks highlights a point of contention in the negotiation process. The Philippines is enhancing its naval strength with the addition of a new fast attack warship, a key component of its self-reliant defense strategy. Furthermore, Mount Canlaon in the Philippines erupted, spewing volcanic ash up to 4 kilometers high. This eruption prompted the shutdown of schools in several regions because of significant ashfall. A politician in the Philippines is also under scrutiny for a sexist comment made at a campaign rally. The remark, framed as a joke, referenced engaging with single women while campaigning. Singapore is strategically positioning itself as a key center for distressed business restructuring in Asia, implementing insolvency reforms to manage shareholder disputes effectively. Simultaneously, Singaporean officials have voiced concerns about possible tariff measures, citing their potential to negatively impact the nation's economy. Meanwhile, Robert Ng, a prominent business magnate, along with his 3 children, have been officially designated as politically significant persons. In a separate legal case, 2 men received jail sentences and caning as punishment for the rape of a 16-year-old girl who was intoxicated, which took place in a public restroom. Ending on a personal note, Deputy Chief Minister Pawan Kalyan has postponed his scheduled visit to Vizag following a fire accident in Singapore that resulted in injuries to his son. NATO saw Navy Vice Admiral Shoshana Chatfield removed from her position by the Trump administration. Meanwhile, Secretary General Mark Rutte visited Japan. The visit aimed to strengthen defense industry connections. Discussions involved increasing production capabilities. Rutte met with defense industry leaders. They explored ways to boost output and cooperation. Rutte also commented on China's staggering military growth. This mirrored NATO's wider worries about global security. Brazil will reinstate visa requirements for citizens of the United States, Canada, and Australia starting this Thursday. This reverses a 6-year policy that had allowed visa-free entry for these nationalities. In an unusual legal matter, Brazilian judge José Eduardo Franco dos Reis was discovered to have lived and worked for 23 years under a false British identity. Edward Albert Lancelot Dodd Canterbury Caterham, Wakefield. The discovery occurred during a routine ID renewal. Vietnam is currently navigating economic headwinds, partly caused by the lingering threat of a 46% tariff imposed by the United States. This tariff, initially conceived during the Trump administration, casts a shadow over Vietnam's economic prospects. The situation stemmed from Chinese exporters attempting to bypass existing US tariffs on Chinese goods by rerouting them through Vietnam. Despite Vietnam's attempts to ease tensions, including tariff reductions on American goods, and Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh efforts to build rapport, like humorously suggesting a golf game with Trump, the tariff threat remains a significant concern. Malaysia was recently the scene of a startling incident where dashcam footage captured a panther attacking a car. The driver, a father, managed to fend off the animal using a water bottle. Adding to environmental concerns, A second headless pygmy elephant corpse was discovered in Malaysia, raising alarms about the escalating threat of ivory poaching. In a bizarre and unsettling event, a man was observed walking along a crane beam more than 120 meters above the ground, sparking speculation about a possible sleepwalking incident. Spain is facing growing internal pressure regarding its role in international events and domestic issues. 6. Neighborhood associations in San Sebastian have formally petitioned FIFA to withdraw the city's designation as a host for the 2030 World Cup, fearing an increase in over-tourism. Adding to the country's challenges, widespread demonstrations involving tens of thousands of citizens have erupted nationwide, focusing on the escalating housing crisis and accusing real estate speculation of being a core cause. Turkey recently saw Özgür Özel re-elected as leader of the country's main opposition party, the CHP. Özel's renewed mandate is anticipated to intensify pressure on Ankara, specifically concerning the arrest of Ekrem İmamoğlu, the HDP presidential candidate. Adding to the complexities, Silivri Prison, Turkey's largest high-security facility, is under scrutiny. The prison houses a wide array of individuals, ranging from politicians and activists to journalists, artists, and those convicted of ordinary crimes. Human rights organizations have voiced concerns about the potentially inhumane conditions prevailing within the prison walls. Cambodia faces increasing restrictions on independent media, pushing remaining outlets toward closure. This is worsened by an executive directive from President Trump. The 2019 Phnom Penh court appearance of former radio, Free Asia journalists Won Chin and Yang Sotharan illustrates the dangers for journalists in Cambodia. Democratic Republic of Congo is grappling with the aftermath of severe flooding in Kinshasa, where 33 lives have been lost. Emergency services are actively relocating hundreds to safe shelters. Authorities are focused on aiding affected individuals and rescuing families stranded by the high waters. South Sudan has voiced strong objections to the United States blanket visa revocation policy. The South Sudanese government considers the policy unjust, especially highlighting an instance of misidentification. This reaction follows Secretary of State Marco Rubio's declaration that the U.S. will invalidate visas for all South Sudanese passport holders. The U.S. decision is a direct response to South Sudan's reluctance to receive its citizens being deported from the United States. Slovakia is grappling with concerns over potential car tariffs that could significantly impact its economy, given its heavy reliance on the automotive sector and its associated supply chains. In other news from Slovakia, the government has declared a state of emergency, a drastic measure prompted by a recent fatal bear attack. This declaration enables authorities to cull hundreds of bears, aiming to mitigate further risks to the public. Bangladesh is seeking a reprieve from the United States regarding impending tariffs, notably on garment exports, which could face a substantial 37% increase. This appeal follows reports of U.S. buyers suspending orders from Bangladesh, despite the nation's attempts to bolster imports from the U.S. Barbados, as the current chair of CARICOM, saw its Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, address President Donald Trump. She highlighted the Caribbean's amicable ties with the U.S. and pushed for trade negotiations to maintain affordable pricing, arguing that Caribbean economies do not harm the U.S. economy. Turning to Taiwan, allegations have surfaced regarding China's use of AI for spreading disinformation, aiming to create discord on the island. In response to these rising tensions, the Taiwanese military is simulating a worst-case scenario where a People's Liberation Army, PLA, drill escalates into a full-blown assault. US military personnel are reportedly monitoring these drills. Moving to Sudan, the capital city of Khartoum is recovering from almost 2 years of war between a paramilitary group and the Sudanese army. Government forces have recently regained control of the city. In Rwanda, President Paul Kagame has reacted vehemently to countries imposing sanctions on Kigali, due to its alleged involvement in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, declaring that those countries could go to hell. The situation in North Macedonia remains grim, as the death toll from a nightclub fire last month has now climbed to 61, with a second critically injured victim passing away while receiving treatment in Lithuania. In Belgium, Prince Laurent is pursuing a state pension through legal means, asserting that he needs the financial support to care for his wife and adult children. Meanwhile, in Iran, the foreign minister has acknowledged that indirect talks with the US are ongoing, with Oman acting as a mediator. The minister, however, expressed doubts about the genuineness of Washington's approach to these discussions. Switching to Fiji, the health ministry is imploring the public to eliminate mosquito breeding sites due to a spike in dengue fever cases, which has already led to the death of a student. Finally, in Panama, Captain Efrain Hallex, a ship pilot, has dedicated over 40 years to navigating vessels through the Panama Canal, bearing witness to significant historical occurrences. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.